Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to Washington, D.C., or actually Arlington, Crystal City, Virginia, to PHMSA's Risk Modeling Methodologies Workshop. This is a day-and-a-half workshop that I've really been looking forward to for a number of months, but appreciate those of you who are here physically. I think we had about 200 signed up. We're expecting about 250. It potentially could get pretty cozy in here with us, but it looks like we have a few spaces here and there, so imagine there'll be a few stragglers coming in, but it's good to see everyone, good to see a lot of familiar faces. We also are webcasting this workshop, and so welcome to those of you who are tuning in from all over the U.S., Canada, and elsewhere. Glad to have you today. You know, before we get started, I'll do my Vanna White duties and just go through a few housekeeping issues. And by the way, my name is Alan Mayberry. Should have started with that. I'm Deputy Associate Administrator for Policy and Programs at PHMSA. I do bring greetings from Administrator Dominguez, our head official at PHMSA, and then also Jeff Weiss, our head career official, Associate Administrator for Pipeline Safety. Jeff could not be here today. Let's see, we need to go to the next little that slide we had up, we have for the benefit of, I think, for webcasters, just so you can see kind of the rundown of the schedule. Okay, there we go. All right, thanks. Well, for those of you who are here and on the webcast as well, there is an agenda that there are copies out on the front desk. Hopefully, for those of you on the webcast, you also have seen the agenda. I'll go through that here in a minute. Also, for those of you here, we do have a list of restaurants that are located nearby. There is a restaurant in the hotel. Probably the biggest variety of restaurants will be if you walk through the tunnel down on the ground level. There'll be a variety of just about everything you can imagine in the world if you walk down that tunnel a ways into the Crystal City Mall. So a wide variety in that area. I encourage you to partake in that at lunchtime that we'll plan to start at noon today. Just a couple of things related to emergency exits. Again, for those here, if you go out these doors to my right and to the right, that'll lead to an exit that will get outside. Alternative, you can also go out these doors, either go left. The closest really would be out to my right. The ones on the left, my left, also come around to the same area that these come to or end up at. If you need to go right, there are also exits. If you walk way down the hall, you can go to the right of the elevators, there's some exits, or if you walk past the restrooms, there's some exits beyond, or an exit beyond that area down there. Speaking of restrooms, they're located about a mile or so down the hall right here. So right across from the concierge lounge, if you're lucky enough to have access to that at the hotel here. So I think I covered that. Yeah, obviously on cell phones, you know, the usual drill. Please have them on vibrate or silence. Coffee will be on your own. There's, I think, coffee options downstairs, also in the Crystal City Mall as well. Let's see, as far as our agenda goes, you know, I'm kicking it off here, and then I'll be turning it over to Ken Lee and Steve and Annie here in a moment to get things kicked off with the technical discussion. And then we'll follow that up with, you know, we'll have a regulator's perspective, both, you know, from our standpoint and then the state perspective, Steve Allen representing NAPSR, and then we'll have the international perspective. Ian Calhoun is joining us from the National Energy Board of Canada to provide a perspective from Canada. I understand Ian's probably just getting to DC right now, so we're probably cutting it close with him coming here on the agenda there. Hopefully he'll be here by 10. If not, we may need to scoot a couple of people around here. Then we'll have our first panel that talks about some research projects that PHMSA has undertaken in the new, some recently awarded research projects that will give you a summary of what's going on and what we're doing related to risk management in our R&D program and some funding that we've done related to that. Then shortly after lunch, or right after lunch, we're lucky enough to have snagged the Honorable Chris Hart, the chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, who will come and provide remarks after lunch. And then we'll get into some perspectives outside the pipeline industry after lunch, and then some other panels related to risk modeling and later in the afternoon as well. And then that'll wrap up day one at about 4:15, 4:30 or so. And I'll come back on to just kind of wrap up, and we'll kind of tee up the next day, which will kick off again at 8:30, and we'll have another panel with 3 speakers, and then we also will have a perspective from Sarah Grossman from University of Arkansas School of Law. She's actually also representing the Pipeline Safety Trust in providing that public perspective. She also happens to be working on a paper that she'll be discussing related to risk management tomorrow. As always, workshops are very important to PHMSA as a way to gather information and to push information as well. It's a key part of our oversight program that, it's not all about our enforcement program or inspection program, but also sharing information and pushing information out, and to really push, spurring of thought to creative thinking, to new ways of doing things, and hence one of the reasons we're here today. So critical to that is your input and your feedback and ideas. Unfortunately, there's not enough time. We had just excellent response on abstracts. There wasn't enough time to really allow everyone to speak, but if you have ideas that maybe you haven't heard, or perspectives or questions that might further help delve into an issue that's important, please bring it up. Your participation is key. And to that end, it's not all about participation by the people here. If you're participating by webcast, we have a very convenient way for you to submit questions, and we have an email address that's on the slide that I have up right now. So please send your questions. We have somebody who will be monitoring email traffic in the back. I think Joshua, you'll be doing that back there. Appreciate that. And then if you're here, we have a mic that we have the mic right here in the middle of the room. And as usual drill, if you would please state your name, and this applies to the webcast participants as well. State your name and your affiliation, and then the question. So that'll be one option here. Also here, if you happen to be shy, you'd just rather not have your, not step up to the mic, we do have cards, and we'll have those available too, so you can write your question. Again, and then we'll have people passing those out. One other option, we even have another option is we have a roving mic. So Jim Merritt there in the back will be helping with that. Through most of these panels, I think we'll have time for Q&A. That's our expectation. Our hope is that there'll be time for questions and answers. I think that covers the housekeeping aspect. Anything I missed on that? And then lastly, the presentation files will be available on our website, and there's the address there that I have up there. And then we also welcome comments on the docket, as always, that we've set up for this meeting. Before I say enjoy the day, I'd just like to say, I've talked to a number of people, a number of you, about this workshop leading up to it. I've really been excited about this. I think we all at PHMSA have been excited about this workshop. It's a little bit of a different twist on what we've normally done. We did go out for abstracts. We've done that on one other workshop that I recall back in 2006, where we had a request for abstracts and had a bunch of people submit them. And we're just really trying to push, really trying to cast a net to pull in ideas, concepts that could really push technology, could really leverage what's known out there. So hence the broadcast for request for abstracts to really, help us, put on the best workshop we can and bring the most relevant information. The fact that some people were not selected, to be here up here and presenting their abstracts is not a reflection on what they submitted. It's really, we just had so many good ones, and it was very difficult to pick them, but it doesn't mean that what was presented or sent to us was not relevant. This is a sequel to a workshop we held in 2011 on risk management. And today, the conversation, we shifted a bit. We're really talking about risk modeling, which is really a subset of risk management. The ability to model risk, and therefore manage risk is highly dependent on understanding the system, pipeline system that is in our case, and the environment it's operating in. And then also understanding the consequence of a failure. I think there should be widespread agreement on this, yet we find time and time again that people or operators are not conservative enough around what is unknown. The conversation gravitates back towards what you know about the pipeline, the data that what you have on that pipeline, and how you address the unknowns or how you address your confidence in what that data is. And establish conservatism around that if it's needed, if it's unknown, if it's, say, default data that you may plug into a risk model. So there's a big variation that we've seen. And in the aftermath of pipeline failures, which thankfully don't happen a lot, aside from the harm to people, property, the environment, we all need to learn from them. I know I've spoken to that end numerous times that regardless, we need to, for every accident, just take a look and see where we need to improve things. Risk modeling is one of those areas that we see as fertile ground for improvement and moving beyond what we've referred to as index models, or sometimes we refer to as simplistic index models, to more investigative methods to look for potential failure paths rather than aggregating risk where you might potentially miss something. So that's a major reason we're here today, is to learn. Like I said, we have a different twist on it today. We are borrowing from outside the industry. I think that's really exciting to see how others are doing it or have done it. That seemed to work well for the safety management systems workshop that we held a year or so ago, year and a half ago. I thought it was very intriguing to get a perspective from outside the industry. I think you'll agree that will probably be one of the highlights of our day here today. So looking forward to that. And then, of course, an appropriate dose of inside the industry and what some have tried. We wanted to showcase, as far as operators, what are some things being done. So you'll see perspective. In this case, we'll have Boardwalk up here talking about something they've done to move beyond or push the envelope a bit on what has traditionally been done. So with that, I'll like to thank you again for being here and your participation, especially those especially those who are here, but also those on the webcast. We'll give you an idea of the numbers we have. I know right now we probably have about 200 or so in the room, but we'll periodically update you on who we have and where. We do get an indication of where on the earth they're located, so we'll give you an idea of where you're tuning in from as well on the webcast. So without further ado, I think I'll turn it over to, oh yes, finally, yes. It's a dry subject, or can be a dry subject, so let's have fun with it too. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ken Lee.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending here and also all the many people on the webcast. My name is Ken Lee. I'm Director of Engineering and Research at PHMSA. As Alan said, this event really follows up an event that we had in July of 2011. And that event, PHMSA and NAPSR held a public workshop on improving pipeline risk assessments and record keeping. And this event focused on gaps in data and poor quality data. And that lack of data does not mean there are no risks. Focus on understanding interactive threats and the need to address this significant challenge. It also talked about that threats are not static, they're dynamic, and they're changing with time. So you constantly need to change and adapt your models to take that into account. And recent pipeline incidents and the National Transportation Safety Board really highlighted the need for continued diligence and improvements in risk analysis. So our previous workshop highlighted the opportunities which we had to improve the overall approach that we have to risk analysis. PHMSA has been quite active in pipeline safety management systems, which risk analysis is a part of. And this workshop will focus on risk modeling, on mainly that subset of risk analysis, which is also a subset of risk management. So we're just going to focus mainly on just the models today and tomorrow. Steve Nanny, our senior engineer in Houston, will continue the rest of the presentation, and he's going to start off with the National Transportation Safety Board recommendations. Thank you. Actually, I got one more slide here. Recent incidents highlight the many different threats which we're seeing. You can see on the top left, we had an incident on a newer pipe where we had corrosion under insulation. On the bottom left, we had a pipeline seam failure. That was a high-frequency electric resistance welded pipe seam on newer pipe. And on the right-hand side, you see some incidents on older pipelines, vintage lines, including ground movement on the top right, which caused the pipeline to fail, and incidents involving natural gas as well as hazardous liquid pipelines. So we're seeing many different threats. So this highlights the different issues that we need to address here. And like I said, Steve Nanny will continue the rest of the presentation, so starting off with the National Transportation Safety Board recommendations.
Good morning. Let me ask one thing before we get started. How many people are more awake in this room than I am right now? I normally get up at 7 a.m. every morning, and that's Houston time. So I'm just now having breakfast if I was in Houston. So anyway, if I miss a beat or two on going through this, just say, well, he's sleepwalking through the presentation. One thing before we go, I always like to start with the last slide first. I'm not going to have it up. But what are the workshop goals? Why are we here today? Well, for me, it's to learn what risk models are. I'm probably the dumbest one in the room, or definitely not the smartest on risk models. So I'm here to learn. I'm here to listen to folks outside the pipeline industry, what they're doing to make things better, to have a takeaway from it. But our workshop goals are this, and is to learn from outside and inside the industry. In other words, to listen and take notes from all these other presenters. I'm not expecting you to take any notes from me because I'm not planning to go over new ground. I'm planning to listen to what the others say here today. We want to spur creative thinking as far as pipeline risk modeling. In other words, what needs to get us out of our comfort zone to do a better job? Or where maybe we're not even doing a job, maybe getting one started. And then to identify the potential next steps. What should you as an industry do? What should PHMSA as an agency do? Should we work together and come up with a guidance document? Do we go separate ways? What do we do to improve the process? So that's the three things from what I'm fixing to say. If you don't remember anything, remember these three things. So if I put you to sleep, just remember these three things. Anyway, one of the reasons we're here, and every time we have one of these type workshops, we talk about San Bruno. I'm sure every one of you in here have heard San Bruno so many times you'd like to kick it in the seat of the pants. I would too, and I think we're moving in the right direction on it. The thing that we need to do now is on our risk, how we treat it. We need to improve that. So this is something here today and Thursday we plan to have many presentations on. Some of the things that the industry and PHMSA has gotten from the NTSB based upon San Bruno is, as you can see here on this slide, is to improve our integrity management performance measures. In other words, to compare the leak, failure, and incident measures to your operator's risk model. How are you putting that in your risk model? So that's one thing that we've gotten from NTSB, from San Bruno. Some others, as you can see, we've gotten, when you see the P-1509, the 15 stands for 2015. So this is a new recommendation that PHMSA and the industry's gotten from NTSB. And it's, if you go on the internet and Google it, you put NTSB P-15-9, it should pop up on your computer. But anyway, it's to establish minimum criteria for eliminating threats and provide guidance to gas transmission pipeline operators for documenting their rationale for all eliminated threats. And I guess the thing is so sometimes on a pipeline system, if it's an older system, it's hard to eliminate all the threats. We've got to realize that eliminating them is ongoing. It may be eliminated today, but due to how you're operating the pipeline, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, it may pop up again as a threat. Another NTSB recommendation is P-1510, is update the guidance for the pipeline industry for the evaluation of interactive threats. And the guidance, as you can see, the second bullet is the guidance should list all threat interactions that must be evaluated and acceptable methods to be used for those. In other words, an example would be if you've got disbonded coating, corrosion, and you're seeing cracking on your pipeline, what do you do for these type interactive threats? And how often do you look for them? Are you doing a one and done on your pipeline? Do you have a robust methodology to go back and relook at it? The next item on here is P-1511, is develop and implement specific risk assessment training for inspectors. In other words, this is PHMSA. You need to better train your inspectors to look for risk and how they're treated by operators. The next one is P-15-12. Evaluate the safety benefits of the 4 risk assessment approaches. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that's the approaches are the subject matter expert, or the SME as we all like to call it, the scenario-based models, the relative assessment models, I always call them the index models, and the probabilistic models, which I don't quite understand and totally, and I know that probably most of us do not have enough information to adequately implement them. And I think that's one of the goals here today, is we want to learn more about those type models. And then last is how do we use these results? How do we evaluate them for safety, to keep our pipeline system safe? The next item we've gotten from NTSB is to update our guidance. In other words, to look at the critical components, the methods for weighting factors, for the factors that should be included for the consequence of the failure, and then the appropriate risk metrics and methods for aggregating these risks. 2 others is, as you can see here, is the first one is the annual report form, to update it, to collect more information on HCA identification and the risk assessment approaches that are used by operators. And then also the incident report form or the accident report form, whether you're gas, or liquid, is to collect information about both the results and previous assessments and previously identified threats for each pipeline segment that are involved in an incident, and to allow the inclusion of multiple root causes when multiple threats are interacted. In other words, more information gathering. The next item that we've gotten this year from NTSB is a gas transmission integrity management safety study. Develop a program to use the data collected to evaluate the relationship between incident occurrences and inappropriate elimination of threats, including interactive threats and the risk assessment approaches used by the pipeline operators, and then give those results out to everyone. From that, what does the code presently say? If you go look, if it's gas transmission integrity management, it'll be under Part 192, Subpart O. If it's gas distribution, it'll be Subpart E under Part 192. And then if it's hazardous liquids pipeline, the IMP program is in 195-452. The thing about all of these programs, it has metrics in there and requirements for doing risk modeling and risk evaluations. And from a PHMSA standpoint, the industry is well beyond a pig and dig aspects of the IMP rules. What we're trying to do here today is to get better models in place, to get guidance out for everyone to do a better job. Also, this is from a philosopher. If you look down at the footnote, I got this from the 2011 PHMSA workshop that Mike Rosenfeld, one of his presentations is, if you look, what is a risk assessment? If you go to B318S, you'll see that it gives a definition here that the risk assessment process identifies the location-specific events or conditions that could lead to a pipeline failure and provides an understanding of the likelihood and consequences of an event. And then if you go look in the gas code or the liquid code, in the gas code under Part 192-917 and on the liquid code 195-452I, you can see that risk assessments are required by both the gas and liquid codes. Integrity management, you know, what does PHMSA see as being a part of it? Of course, the threat identification. You know, one of the things that highlights San Bruno, that at every one of these seminars or workshops we seem to get up and talk about is San Bruno. The pipe was categorized as being seamless, 30-inch seamless pipe. And we've got to make sure whatever we do that we characterize it right. We identify the threat correctly. If we say we've got seamless pipe when we've got low frequency ERW or some type submerged arc welded or whatever type welded we've got, we may be missing the boat. And that gets down to data gathering and integration of that information. We have been having workshops on the integrity verification process as far as getting data for your pipelines, doing a better job of that. And then the risk analysis, that's the pinpoint here today, is when should we have assessment intervals? Should they be 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? And how do we come up with the assessment intervals? Are we doing fatigue models? Are we not doing fatigue models? Are we looking at the pressure profile of the pipeline or the operational pressure profile? What preventative and mitigative measures are we putting into place? What are those measures? Are they appropriate for the type risk that we have on the pipeline? And then are we monitoring the defects or the anomalies in the pipeline? And again, that decision-making has to be an ongoing process. The risk evaluation requirements for a successful integrity management program, it should be investigative, data-driven, analytical. Definitely look at interacting threats. We think in most models that's a weakness that operators have, is how they look at interacting threats. I know for some of them, it's very hard when you've got one, two, three, maybe even four things that are acting together to cause the problem. What is your integrity decision-making? And then what are you doing for the prevention and mitigation of those? The risk evaluation of requirements. The risk evaluation approaches, they need to be investigative-oriented. And for me, what that means is you've got to get out on the pipeline. In a lot of cases, you've got to dig it up to see what's wrong. Or you've got to run a pig through and properly evaluate those results. And you've got to make sure that your ILI vendor is giving you all of those results, that you're properly giving them requirements, that you get them, that some of them are not hidden. Not that you would know they were hidden, but make sure you skin the onion to make sure you're getting all of those. In other words, the approach must tell us what can be done to reduce risk and what is the highest relative risk on our pipeline. And in generating the risk numbers, that's not the end goal, but we should have a structured way to evaluate and reduce the operational risk. That is the goal. And from PHMSA's standpoint, past index models are not sufficient. We've got to look at what do we do on these interactive threats. Do we use two separate models to look at threats? It may be that one model is not the end all. As far as data, as you can see, the head of this slide is data, data, data. If you don't have the data, it's hard to do the risk model. And again, missing and inaccurate data results in an unreliable risk evaluation conclusion. In other words, garbage in, garbage out if you don't have good information. That's why PHMSA is pushing the integrity verification process for both gas and liquid pipelines, because we see that there are gaps still in the basic data. And I guess, a question talking about that is if you have missing data, just think back. You've been doing integrity management now for, 10 years, 12 years, depending upon whether it's gas or liquid. On the pipelines where you do have data gaps, have you been doing destructive testing on the pipe? On the seam, on the pipe body, looking at the coating, where you don't have that information, so that you gather that information. Are you looking at the pipe to see if you've got cracking in the pipe? Are you doing all the various things? Not just running pigs, but when you go and actually dig up the pipeline, are you looking at everything? And then keeping the data up to date. I know that's a big challenge, is keeping the data. Also on data and risk assessment, again, poor quality data is a key item that PHMSA sees as far as bad risk assessments. No risk model can compensate for bad data, whether it's wrong data, missing data, or just inappropriate defaults where you don't have data. And again, B318S, which we all point to as being the guide, whether it's the code or operators, you can see it says inaccurate data will produce a less accurate risk result, which to me is just common sense. Threats, the threat identification, evaluate existing and potential threats, justify the elimination of threats from consideration, whether it's time-dependent or time-independent threats, they all need to be looked at. And then another that I think a lot of operators are doing more of is making sure you keep up with near misses. They become part of the process in your maintenance records. Make sure that you're getting those and you're incorporating them, that you've got a good data integration process that's ongoing. And again, known threats identified in industry literature, learn from others. Threat identifications, understand how these threats interact with each other. Consider that interactive threats can be a potential threat. Here's some examples, like earth movement. Could it create problems in your pipeline, whether it's wrinkle bends or if you've got vintage-type girth wells that may not have ever been x-rayed, that may be cracked. And when you start getting movement, those cracks open up. whether you've got external corrosion or third-party damage. And then the last is disbonded coating, shielding coating, and corrosion and possible SCC. Do you have that? And again, go back and look at some of the PHMSA advisory bulletins, whether it's on SCC or low-frequency ERW. Most of the time when we are having things that everyone throughout the industry is seeing, we do put out advisory bulletins on it. Risk methods, if you look at the bottom of the slide, I have no idea what the P is greater than P1 plus P2 is, but I think we're going to learn this week as we go through this what that means in real terms. But anyway, risk evaluation methods, they must be analytical to be predictive. In other words, the threats on a pipeline segment may be increasing, they may be decreasing. And you need to look at the consequence. Well, what's around the pipeline in this area and consider it. And then the interactive threat potential of becoming a major issue. In other words, that equation, you've got threat 1 and threat 2 combined, they become a bigger threat than just by themselves. As far as risk methods, the risk evaluation methods, they must be predictive. The results need to reflect year-to-year changes in risk levels. You've got to consider operational information, environmental, and the assessments and testing that you're conducting on your pipeline. Does the overall risk profile match your operational experience? A lot of times PHMSA sees that that's not being adequately implemented in risk models. Again, as the risk evaluation methods, they must be sufficiently analytical to be predictive. The approaches should vary between respective types of threats. We've got to have different approaches based upon the type threats. Connection to decision making. Risk evaluation results must have a connection to real-life decision making. The point of risk evaluations is not to just do the risk evaluation. In other words, it's not to check the box. Risk insights must be integrated into routine, integrity-related decision making, and operators should be able to easily demonstrate how risk evaluation results influence operational work practices. And that's the one that's key is a lot of times we're doing the risk model and we're not implementing the results of it. Or we're implementing it on just a small segment of the pipeline system. And again, the P&M measures, the preventative and mitigative measures, the decision making should include the identification and the evaluation of these methods, and of course the implementation of them. If the risk methodology is unable to reflect any change in results of the meaningful candidate measures, the methodology is inadequate. And then the P&M measures, are you considering pipe replacement? You know, if we've got seam issues or cracking issues on a pipeline that we just keep having the issues, should we be considering replacing the pipe? You know, that's not an unheard of thing. I did it 30 years ago, working for an operator, replaced pipe with Youngstown steel that had low frequency ERW, hundreds of miles of it. You know, sometimes when we have pipe and we keep having the issues, we need to replace it. Are the risk-based decision criteria consistent between different threat categories? And then if you do have a segment that you have issues, can you isolate it if you do have an issue? Can you do that timely? I would look at that as a P&M measure to make sure I have in place. Again, the mitigative measures, the consequence of the risk must not be ignored. If you're in a Class 3, Class 4 location or in an HCA, what are your mitigative measures? The pipeline risk is not limited to the right-of-way. What are we doing in our facilities? Whether it's a compressor station, pump station, or tank farm, what are we doing there? Some recent inspection issues that PHMSA has seen, I just want to touch base, and let me say, I personally didn't see these. This is what's been given to me. This is just an overview of what PHMSA has seen on inspections from different regions. It's not trying to pinpoint one region versus another or anything. And again, some of these issues are data provided to the risk model vendor was not read properly into the model in validating the results. In other words, you may have had good results or good information, but it wasn't properly put in the model. Inadequate evaluation of manufacturing threats with regards to increases in historical operating pressures. And then the last is there was a leak on the pipeline, and it was not assessed as having an impact on the reassessment interval for the pipeline, which I guess the last one is sort of surprising, that you could have a leak on a pipeline and not think that you should evaluate your reassessment interval. Going on down, some others is unable to demonstrate evaluation of facility risk and what has been completed for each station. Using subject matter experts for risk analysis, but there were no qualifications documented for the SME. Missing risk factors evaluated, such as low-frequency ERW seams, disbonded or shielding coatings, and shorted casings. In other words, they weren't put in the model as a risk. I mean, that model missed it totally in my book if it didn't have things like that in there. I mean, that's what risk modeling is all about. What can be done to improve the overall performance of pipeline risk models? And again, that's a major goal of the next 2 days, is for all of us to listen to what the experts that we've invited here today from other industries, to take notes from what they're doing, and hopefully from that we can better define our risk models. What PHMSA plans to do, and you'll hear Alan, Ken, and myself talking about it throughout the meeting, is looking to see PHMSA working with you as an industry, working with the public, to see what kind of guidance documents we can put in place to better define, to get everybody at the same point in what we put into risk models and how we evaluate them. And again, as I said earlier, if you don't remember anything that I said through the past 20 or 30 minutes, just remember this as you go through this meeting. We want you to learn, we want to have creative thinking, and we want to come up with potential next steps of what we do. And from a PHMSA perspective, that would be putting together a group to come up with how we look at threats, whether they're interactive or whether it's a single threat. How do we evaluate them? How do we do reassessments? And thank you for listening. I didn't see anyone asleep, so thanks.